Down south.
Mr Speaker, I too rise to support the passage of the legislation bill, but I do want to comment on the sequence of events, because it does seem to me that we have ended up delaying unnecessarily the passage of this particular measure. So we've got two Law Commission reports, and despite what my colleague said before, presentation of New Zealand statute law in 2008, review of the Statutes Drafting and Compilation Act 1920-09, actually that's a good track record to have Law Commission reports that are so recent in front of the House. So, when you compare other Law Commission reports and how long they take to get to the House, then that actually is quite good progress. However, this legislation was introduced mid-2010, and it was reported back from the Select Committee at the end of 2010. So we actually had 2011 to deal with this particular measure and pass it through all of its stages. It could have been well implemented by now, but that didn't happen. And in fact, it's been sitting on the order paper now for so long, reported back from the Regulations Review Committee, that I wasn't on the Regulations Review Committee at the time that this particular bill was considered. And I think it is worth mentioning that it is unusual for the Regulations Review Committee to consider legislation. Normally we're considering regulations, or we're considering regulation-making powers within statutes, but to have a legislation bill referred to us as a committee is actually an unusual step, and I think it is worthy of merit. And I think that's because of the content. The content of it doesn't sit very easily with other subject committees, because it is more of a general focus on the nature of the legislation itself. So not the content, but the parameters of the law, which is something that the Regulations Review Committee is very mindful of. So I too want to place on record my personal regret at the passing of George Tanner. He made George Tanner, sorry, that was my mistake. I felt in the time that he was the Chief Parliamentary Counsel at Parliament, he gave tremendous service. And when he moved to the Law Commission, I felt that the Law Commission had gained something that the Law Commission really needed, which was that quality perception around the drafting, and that needed to be strengthened within the Law Commission now that they have that responsibility of looking at drafting measures to sit with their reports to Parliament. So I really think he was a great loss to New Zealand, but certainly a great loss to the whole issue of statutory drafting. So the reason that I kind of wanted to mention that is that when somebody of that calibre comes and makes submissions to a select committee, it does make a real difference. And I think that it is worthwhile mentioning that our select committee process has enabled people of that calibre to come forward and to submit on legislation that might seem so dry, but actually is quite fundamentally important to how accessible the law is going to be. This bill, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because, of course, I wasn't on the Regulations Review Committee when they considered it, but I just wanted to make the point that not only did it pick up on those two Law Commission reports, it also responded to recommendations made by a previous Regulations Review Committee on inquiries relating to incorporating material by reference. And I was on the Regulations Review Committee when that particular report was undertaken. And so I'm really pleased to see in the statute a provision that specifically deals with how material incorporated by reference is going to be dealt with in the future. And for those that are not familiar with the work of the previous Regulations Review Committee, material incorporated by reference when well, an example would be a standard that's made by a joint standard, so FSANZ, the Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. If they make a standard that is then incorporated by reference into legislation, you don't need to write in the entire standard and then amend it every time the standard is amended. In fact, by making it publicly available, then it is automatically incorporated by reference with the use of appropriate clauses in the legislation and then with appropriate checks and balances so that people can access the material that is incorporated by reference. And it's all about accessibility, but also ensuring that our legislation can stay up to date with regulations without necessarily changing the law in order to meet an outside body's standard setting process. So just with those few comments in mind, Mr Speaker, I too, as others have said, am very pleased to see that this bill is progressing. I would have very strongly objected to this legislation going into the Regulatory Standards Bill, so I'm glad that my colleague Charles Chauvel was able to indicate to the government that that would lose the bipartisan support that this bill now enjoys because it is kept separate from legislation that doesn't fit with this particular framework, and I'm very pleased to support its passage through the House.
Call Julianne Genter.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Thank you. Very pleased to take a very short call on the second